We're celebrating the anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement. And I just think it's important that people remember what things were like before we had the peace process, before we had the agreement. You know, I'm of a generation, you're pretty much of a generation that remembers those times, remembers waking up every day to the tales of violence and extremism and murder and terrible things happening, deep divisions and sectarian hatred. Now, the truth is, the agreement was never going to simply, the day after it, usher in a brave new world and everything was going to be fine. But where we are today should be compared not with the ideal world, but with where we were. And when you compare that, you realize, one, that it was a huge achievement of everyone concerned to bring about the agreement, and secondly, it's worth keeping. And it would be dangerous and foolish to put it at risk.
Obviously, it did deliver peace, and that was the main aim. But in terms of the political system it's set up, that seems to have been prone to deadlock. Now we've got no assembly, no executive. Do you think it's time to reform it, to do a nuts and bolts review of it?
You know, when I look at the issues that are currently interrupting progress at Stormont, they seem to be the very types of issues we were dealing with all through my 10 years as Prime Minister. And after the Good Friday Agreement, by the way, I was constantly involved in every single stage of the negotiation and process, and probably in the 10 years I was Prime Minister, I must have visited Northern Ireland more than probably all my predecessors put together since partition. And, you know, therefore, it was never going to be a situation in which there weren't constantly going to be issues that divided, that still had a deep cultural significance, for example, and that required constant working on. But this is what happens with these peace processes. And nowadays, because I see a lot of what's happening in different parts of the world, you realize wherever there is a peace process, the work doesn't end at the moment you have an agreement. The work carries on, and it carries on probably for a generation, maybe 2 generations. But it's better to do that than to go back to the time of conflict.
Well, how much responsibility then do you put on the current government for the situation we're in? Has Theresa May, David Cameron, have they taken their eye off the ball too much?
Well, I don't sort of allocate responsibility for what's happened, but I kind of urge responsibility for the future. I mean, I think they need to realize that this requires the full focus of government at certain points in time. And for example, with this impasse that there is at the moment, I can't believe it's not possible to find a way around it. It's very similar to the types of issues we used to deal with, and you just got to keep working at them until you find a way through. Now, it's not easy, and the whole issues around Brexit obviously complicate things for a variety of reasons, but nonetheless, it's still worth doing.
Do you think that the fact that Theresa May is relying on the DUP makes it harder for her to be the kind of independent broker that you were? Does she need to bring in some sort of outside mediator?
I think she can do it because, you know, to be fair to her, I'm sure she wants to keep the Good Friday Agreement, and she wants to make sure it works satisfactorily. But I do think it's important to realize there were points of time, certainly in that 10 years, because remember, we went through setting up of the new Northern Ireland Police Service, decommissioning, Drumcree. There were always things happening. And at a certain point, the authority of the Prime Minister is necessary in order to get people to move and to sort of come into some form of alignment. So look, I don't, you know, I think it's constant work. That's all I'm saying.